Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a great day. My name is Chloe Cooley, and I'm the host of this brand new show that's called What's Happening. And this is going to be airing on WLJS every Tuesday morning, same time as it is right now from 8 to 9 a.m. Um, and the show will also be posted on Spotify and YouTube just in case you miss an episode. The show, What's Happening, is meant to be a non biased news and political talk interview show. Basically, I am going to be bringing new guests on every week. These are people from a lot of different backgrounds, and they're going to present the listeners with a lot of information and their thoughts so that you can form your own opinions on the issues that we're talking about. Um, it's going to be a great show. It's going to be very educational. And I think it'll be very beneficial for any listener, no matter who you are. There's always more that you can learn on these topics. So you might be wondering who is hosting the show. Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of information on me before we get into the topic at hand. So, as I said, my name is Chloe Cooley. I'm a junior here at JSU. I'm majoring in political science and minoring in communications. I'm from Boaz, Alabama. It's a pretty small town, I would say. I'm the oldest in my family, two younger siblings. My parents and my family are super great, and shout out to them because I'm sure that some of them are listening right now. I have a great boyfriend, lots of friends. I'm always doing something. I love to read, and basically my life, I would say, consists of traveling or planning my next trip. It's always a cycle with that. That's just kind of some of my hobbies. So you also might be wondering, why am I doing a talk show on politics? Well, it's definitely out of my comfort zone, I would say. But what comes to my mind is when I told my mom that I was doing this show, she said, well, you never know until you try. So here I am, giving it a try, thanks to my mom's encouraging words. So growing up, I was not interested in politics at all, I would say. Never. It was never on my radar. I was an art and theater kid in middle and high school. But senior year, that kind of changed a little bit. I was in Coach Gaskin's class, which was Civics, and he was kind of presenting every day both sides of the issue that were going on. And that kind of became my favorite class, I would say. I became more interested in politics as time went on, but still coming into college, politics was not on my mind at all. I was actually an elementary education major when I first came to school because I have a lot of teachers in my family, and I really look up to them and thought that that would be a great thing for me to do. But I slowly, after some reflection, realized that that was not for me. So the spring of my freshman year, I took Dr. Gross's Intro to American Government class, which I think is a class that everyone is required to take. Maybe I think a lot of people are required to take it. But I took it because I was required to. And from that point, I was pretty hooked. I changed my major to political science, I think 3 days after that. And I restructured all of my classes, and I've been set on political science ever since. So I do have a lot of experience in this field, like 3 years of my life. So you might also be wondering, why did I just tell you that whole story? Well, it does all tie together. I promise you that much. So for me, I couldn't have really cared less at all about political affairs, I would say, as I said, until college. But that is just not how it should be. I think that everyone should have a vested interest in political affairs and issues. And that is kind of the point and the reason behind why I'm doing this show, is to reach the people that think that politics don't matter, that their opinion on these topics don't matter. And I know, at least for my generation, a lot of people think that their vote on topics doesn't matter. And I just think that everyone should be educated on these topics so that we can all make the best educated decision. And so on that topic, it's finally time for me to get to the main point of this episode, which is titled The Importance of Civil Education. And I have a great special guest with me here today. That is Dr. Tim Barnett, and he's going to bring some great expertise on this point. So, Dr. Barnett, thank you so much for coming on.
Glad to be here.
So, if you could just tell the audience a little bit about yourself, about your background.
But I was raised in the Pacific Northwest and had other educational goals in mind. And then in my early 20s, through exposure to some very adept political thinkers, decided that this was an area that was fascinating to me. So I kind of changed direction, and that ended up with me pursuing a master's degree in public administration and then a political science degree at the University of Kansas. And I've been here at JSU now for about 21 years.
Thank you so much for all that information. Yes, so sorry to our listeners. We did have some technical difficulties. But so we're just going to keep on rolling. So I've been doing some research for this show, and I have found a lot of articles that have talked about how political education and kind of education in general has went down significantly in the U.S. So basically people being aware of topics and important issues that are happening, people just are not as aware now. And this is a serious issue to discuss, I would say. So what do you think is the cause of this decline of people just not being as interested in these topics?
I think a lot goes into it. One, the nature of political discourse nowadays is distasteful to some people and stressful, and so people would rather do things that are more pleasant. I think we have an abundance of entertainment opportunities, and so that's, the easy course to take instead. I think there's also kind of a feedback loop between education that is somewhat distracted from these topics. I mean, you look at the curriculum that is offered nowadays, and it doesn't have nearly as much civic education content as it once did. And so with less stimulus for students to think in these areas, I think that we get the result we have.
Yeah, I think that is a great point. Like you said, it is easier to just go home and watch TV than it is to make yourself aware of these topics. And so I think that's an important point to bring up. So this has been on the decline, I would say, for the last 10 years. I found a lot of reports that kind of gave that as their base. For the last 10 years, people have just been gradually becoming uninterested. What do you think are the consequences of this as a society?
Well, Chloe, I think the consequences are pretty significant. I mean, we consider ourselves a Republican democracy. So the Republican word refers to the idea that you have an informed electorate that is, voting for people who have integrity. And then democracy, of course, that word is people rule. So if the people are to rule through the representatives that they elect, and the people don't adequately understand the political landscape or our political history, then it complicates the prospect of them making good decisions when they go to vote. So civic education that inspires people to be at their best and be involved and participate responsibly, this is of great importance in contributing to a bright future for the country.
Yeah, that is a great point. And I hate to say it in my generation again, but in my generation, a lot of people, like I said earlier, just aren't voting. I think we have the lowest voting rate of any generation ever. And that's pretty terrible for my generation. So that definitely has an effect. So as a teacher, someone who's been a teacher for a long time, what is your experience with this kind of disinterest in political affairs as someone who teaches political science courses?
All right, great question. Well, I think one dynamic that is happening today is that students are reading a lot less out of textbooks. It's so easy to just read an online article or just listen to something, but to really unpack things being able to get into a rich text can really make a difference. And so it's almost an art, or a skill that people develop through practicing it, and they develop a taste for it. And so I think the lack of reading of valuable political literature is one of the consequences I see of this reduction in civic education. I think another thing is that with housing inflation and cost having climbed so high in our society, students are rationally asking, what can I do to make a good living? And political science or civic education, those aren't high on the radar of where the best money opportunities are. And so I think that we're not seeing the number of really motivated students in this field that was the case at an earlier time. On the other hand, turn the coin over, and there are young people like yourself who are saying, we've got to step up and we've got to do something about societal drift or whatever the concern is. And so happily, I think we do continue to get some very fine students in this field.
Thank you so much. So, yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think I saw a study also that reading has went down just in general. Nobody reads anything for pleasure or for class. A lot of people just are not reading at all anymore, and that makes me really sad. I love to read. But, yeah, that is a very sad thing that has kind of come along. And it's like you said, we have so many entertainment opportunities that why would someone sit down and read a book whenever there's, to some people, things that are more entertaining out there. Okay, so would you say that everyone, no matter who they are, what job they have, that they need to be educated on political topics, events that are happening in the world today?
Well, that's a very good question. I think that rationally, there are people who can get by with less information in this area than others. For example, some people are just in fields where there's not much opportunity for discourse on political things, whereas other people are involved in fields of corporate endeavor or information distribution, and it's part of their life, their lifestyle, to be engaged in these topics. So, yes, there's room for differences in the level of exposure and education, but at the same time, one would like to think that if we're going to vote, there are some basic minimums of knowledge and competency in processing political information that are appropriate. And I think that that's one thing that has happened as our society, Chloe, has moved towards pushing more and more participation, is we're bringing in an increasingly significant number of people that don't understand the process, they don't understand their vote, and we have to ask, what is the consequence of uninformed votes in the electoral process?
Yeah, that is very interesting. And something that I actually looked into for your class last semester was this report that it was a news station that I cannot remember, but I'm pretty sure it was in Ohio, and they did a study. They were asking people that were waiting outside to go in and vote if they could name the candidates on the ballot, and a lot of them could not. Most of them did not know at all who they were voting for. They were just going to go in there and cast a vote, and that can be very dangerous. That can have some very negative effects. And I think, yeah, like you said, if we're going to vote, you need to be educated on the topics. And like I said earlier, my generation is the lowest voting rate of any generation. So I think that is something that we definitely need to address, is to be educated so that we can make a good, educated vote. Um, so would having like political education, civic education, courses in schools like high school, middle school, do you think that that would be a potential solution to this problem to encourage people to be more active in these issues as they get older?
Well, I do think that any kind of quality exposure or stimulus is going to be beneficial in helping people get involved. But that said, there's a certain amount of self-image that goes into these things. I mean, we all perceive ourselves in certain ways, and we come to value certain aspects of our personality or our commitment to do one thing or another. And so there's something that I think is broader than civic education that underlies a lot of this. And for lack of a better term, I might call it character development. Just the basic sense of personal responsibility and duty to one's fellow man, a sense of belonging in a community, the desire to help other people. And then our participation in the electoral process becomes just one aspect of expressing our character development. So there are a lot of institutions and organizations out there that people can be involved in that would help contribute to quality character development. This is one aspect of what we read when we read like the Federalist Papers, that were written to help Americans decide whether or not to ratify the U.S. Constitution in 1787. It was character development issues were worked into the discussion of the political because they really are foundational.
Yeah, I think that is a great point. Yeah, I definitely think that in general, just courses like that are helpful. Like I said, I had a course in high school that everybody had to have to graduate. And that was pretty, like I said in my story a while ago, that was pretty foundational in my interest in politics. And I think that that's something that a lot of people should experience or have a class like that, just to kind of get the ball rolling. But I think you bring a really good point on that. Let's see. So, how can we encourage like a culture of lifetime learning on this, basically regarding political and civil education? So always being interested, always being aware of what's going on. Is there a way that you think we can encourage that in America?
I'm sure that a lot of people are thinking very seriously about these questions, Chloe, and asking how we go about this in our age where it's so easy for youngsters, for example, to get very involved in gaming and just, playing these games that very quickly provide gratification but do very little in terms of just helping them develop as people. There's probably no easy answers. Culture is a very widespread thing, and there's so many elements to culture that single or narrow-focused efforts are not going to do the job, but cumulatively and in the aggregate, if we deal with enough of the elements that go into character development, we can probably make some progress. So how do we start? I think it starts with the family. Families getting the vision of taking the time to be together, to love each other, building in basic values of caring and self-responsibility. And I think one term that's really important in here, Chloe, is intentionality. That is learning what it means to focus and really get good at something, get immersed in it until one has a certain level of expertise. And so as we get good at things that relate to the well-being of our country, and we learn the attractions of prizing the national good, then I think that changes the whole motivational context, and it starts snowballing. And the fact that your friends are interested in this makes it easier to be interested yourself. And so that's why I think the whole cultural dynamic is really important in helping build a civically responsible society.
Yeah, you bring a lot of great points, and I think the point of intentionality is great. You have to have a lot of intention in this field, I would say, especially like as a student. Most of my time is spent reading things that you give me or things other teachers give me. And as tedious as that might be, I have definitely, I would say, reaped the benefits of being so intentional in my studies. And I think that's something that a lot of people should learn to do, or kind of take away from this, is definitely be intentional. Be careful what you spend your time doing. You know, you only have so much time. Be careful how you spend it is what I would say about that. Let's see.
Could I ask you a quick question here, Chloe?
Yeah, go ahead.
So you're in one of my classes on intergovernmental relations, and we study things like the Federalist Papers in there. So what does it feel like from a student perspective to tackle some of these documents that were written back in 1787, and they're quite complex because it was a little different communication style back then. So how do you develop as a student a taste for that kind of thing and really get into the text?
I would definitely not say that it's easy. It's definitely very hard. I think that's what can discourage a lot of students, or make a lot of students just in general not do the reading, is because you can't just read it once. You have to read it multiple times. You have to be annotating, taking notes, asking questions. If you're like me, I Google search a word probably every 5 seconds because I'm like, what was Alexander Hamilton trying to say here? Because I don't know what this word means. It's a lot of being very tedious. It takes so much time and effort, but there's definitely so much that you can learn from those documents that I think that everyone should read them. Like, if I was president, that would be my rule, is that everyone should read the Federalist Papers and kind of see, because it's important about what our country was founded on, that type of thing. I definitely think that it is not easy, and yeah, as a student, it's a lot I'm glad that I have friends in our classes, like our whole intergovernmental relations class. We all know each other. We're all upperclassmen and have had, at this point, every class together with each other. So we all really know each other well, and we text each other, we call each other, we have study groups, and that definitely makes things a lot easier, is to see how other people are perceiving it. I would definitely say that hearing other people's perspectives is also very helpful. And I also watch there's lots of YouTube videos and content out there that can explain deeper concepts and make things a lot easier too. So if there's any political science students out there listening, definitely look up some YouTube videos about what you're assigned to read, because I promise it'll come back to help you. Do you have any other questions for me? Or do you want me to keep going on yours?
You can keep going, but I'll come up with some for you, for sure.
Okay. Do you have a story that highlights, like, how impactful political and civil education can be on an individual, on a community level, or just something that you think is kind of relevant to this topic here?
Well, there's a lot of different ways a person can get involved civically. And the public good is a great phrase to describe what we're after. And there are so many aspects of the public good. So like when I was working on my master's public administration at Boise State University, we had several people there that specialized in conservation and ecological studies. And in particular, one gentleman was a regional expert on Yellowstone National Park and the whole ecosystem there. So I got quite involved in that. And when one is able to actually travel then to Yellowstone and spend a good amount of time and really immerse oneself in that environment, one comes to realize how special it is. Many people don't realize that in terms of geothermal developments, Yellowstone has the most spectacular set of geysers of any place on Earth. So this is the number one place for that kind of geologic expression. And so being able to get beyond the classroom and actually get into the landscape of whatever one is studying can be really helpful. Now, I had a student a few years ago, and he was thinking that he might want to go to work for the State Department or whatever. He took several classes from me, and I told some of these stories about my experiences out west and national parks and the whole ecological dynamic. And he became more and more interested in that and ended up applying when he graduated here with a great GPA. He applied for a job as an interpretive ranger in a national park. He ended up being able to do that in the Grand Tetons and in Yellowstone and most recently in Zion, and now he's going to be heading up to do a national park in Alaska. So Garrett, if you're out there and you're listening to this, you're a great example of what it means to turn one's book learning into really a very exciting opportunity in life to be involved in the development of the public good.
Yeah, that is a very interesting story. So would you say that, like we've been talking about, reading like the Federalist Papers, or like I've read in some of Dr. Gross's classes, like philosophers, do you think that there's a way to apply what we're learning from reading these texts to our lives that we can take away from that?
Oh, I certainly do. One of the things that is emphasized, for example, Chloe, in the Federalist Papers has to do with civic virtue, and that is the qualities that we bring into civil dialogue when we're exchanging ideas with other people. How do we go about that? And do we approach these opportunities in a way that encourages other people to bring out their best ideas? And so I think it would be great if we could find ways to give students more practice in learning or applying the concepts that they learn in the classroom.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Dr. Barnett. We are going to just continue on. So kind of what you said a second ago brought up a question for me, which is, do you think that traveling can shape someone's character development and education?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, travel is a fabulous way to expand one's horizons and understand problems and challenges, opportunities, people's situations, from a new perspective. So I strongly encourage students, if they can during their educational years, to study abroad or to travel in the summertime and have some new experiences. I think the fact that even during this country's formative years, that a number of our leading founding fathers spent time overseas in Europe and brought back ideas from that political landscape was very constructive to our development as a country.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like I said in my introduction, I have grown up traveling. My parents are big travel people. We have been all over the place. And I would say I've learned a lot while traveling. There's a lot you can observe about people and about the culture of wherever you're going, because it's always different from the South. We have such a strong culture here. And a few years ago, I went with my parents to Colorado, and it was completely different. And that's always something that people need to realize too, is it is a small world, but places are vastly different. And it's definitely a good experience to travel, to get yourself comfortable in environments that you're not used to, that's definitely a great thing that can come from traveling, I would say.
Let's talk about that for a minute. That's fascinating to me. So, can you think of a couple places that you've been that have helped you see things in a little different way? Like, let me illustrate. I've been able to visit all 50 states in my life. I've lived in 8 states. I have 3 college-age sons, and I've taken them to over 30 states. My wife and I have done this. And we've experienced everything from Acadia National Park up in Maine, all the way to the Redwoods in California and the Olympics in Washington State. But certain places that a person goes can really be impactful on one's understanding. I mean, even comparing, say, like Capitol buildings in the various states and seeing how each state imagined this most important building, to represent them, even in the architecture, and then the things that are kept inside of the Capitol as memorabilia, these things are, educative. So when you, Chloe, think about places that you've been, what experiences do you call to mind that were very helpful in expanding your horizons?
Yeah, there's a lot that I would say. Like I said, my family travels a lot, and then my friend group, any chance to take a road trip, and we will hop in the car and go. So I would say a place that I have been that was very interesting for sure, like I said, was Colorado. Just the culture out there is so different. I feel like people in the South are so always in a hurry, always got things to go to type of thing. And in Colorado, it was so laid back. It was, I would say, basically the complete opposite. Everybody was like relaxed, not in a hurry. It was just calm type of thing. That's really very different. And something that I like to talk about a lot is Southern hospitality. That does not exist outside the South, and that can be a big culture shock if you've lived in the South your whole life, is leaving the South, going out west, or going even to the North. The Southern hospitality is not there. People, and especially other cities, have their own way of doing things, and most of them are not, I'm not going to say they're not as nice as we are in the South, but I would say that's definitely something I've taken away from that. I've also been to New Orleans, and that is also a place with a lot different culture. They are in the South, but they have a lot of French culture there, and that is very interesting. And a place I'm so excited about going to is I'm going to Paris this summer with my family, and I'm so excited about that, to see what all I can come away from that with. And we are so lucky. We get to go to a lot of museums. We have like tour guides, and I feel like there's a lot I'm gonna learn from just that trip alone, the 9 days or however long it is. There's definitely a lot that I'm gonna take away from that. So it's my first time ever out of the country. My whole family's first time out of the country. And
Congratulations. It sounds like it's going to be terrific.
It's going to be a great trip.
But I want to visit one aspect of that, Chloe, and that is that we have something in the United States called federalism that gives every state partial autonomy in the development of its laws and culture. And this is one of the things that makes travel exciting, is that as we go to different places, there is real variation, and there's room for people to try to develop a culture that best fits their values and their preferences. And some countries in the world don't have that. It's more monolithic, like the same way across the whole landscape. So here in the United States, this federalism that is part of our constitutional design and part of our culture has given us a lot richer landscape for people to experience. And I'm glad we have regions of the country that vary one from another, aren't you?
Yeah. I think I've seen this video before, but something that I think people from Europe, most of what I've seen has been people from England. They're talking about how big America is. Like, it's kind of become a thing on the internet, and some of the young people in my generation might know what I'm talking about. But there was a girl who was asked, like, she was in America, and somebody was like, oh, where are you from? And she gave the answer, and the American person was like, is that close to London? And she said no, but it was only 2 hours away from London. And I think that's so funny to me, the difference, because for people in tiny little countries in Europe, 2 hours is a drive they're not going to make. But for me, like, with me and my boyfriend, we drive 5 hours just to go see his parents. So it's just crazy, like, the scale. And yeah, I definitely would say that every state, and you've been to all of them, that they all have different environments, different vibes that you'll pick up on. I think that's really good for people to learn about. Like, America is so big. There is so much that you can see, and I definitely don't think that you have to go abroad to gain things from traveling, gain an education from traveling, but because there's so much that you can learn here in America. And yeah, I think that is some great points. Do you have any other questions, or do you want me to keep going on mine?
You can keep going on yours. That's fine.
Okay. So if it was up to you, how would you encourage people to become, like, to participate in the democratic processes that we have? So voting, being educated on it, all of that. If it was up to you, if you're laying down the law, how would you encourage these people to become participated in all of these?
Well, one of the great things about living in the U.S. is we do get a multifaceted education that allows people to develop an appreciation for a lot of different areas. You can be here at JSU and study in political science or chemistry or business, and also take a ceramics class or an art class and be exposed to other things that you didn't previously understand. And so I think a well-rounded education, is worth a lot because we live in a very complex society, and so oftentimes there's a lot that enters into, a question like housing, for example. Right now, we're living with a shortage of housing in the United States. I'm told that we're about 5 to 6 million homes short of where we should ideally be to have a balance between supply and demand and allow people to get into homes at reasonable prices. So how does one go about understanding the housing landscape, Chloe, from a policy perspective, or what could be done there? Well, geography enters into this, and geology, because in some parts of the country it's much easier to start new residential developments than others. I mean, we have to ask, what's the situation with the water table, or what's the access to freeway and that kind of travel, or what is the climate going to be like, because older people don't as much want to live in real cold climates. So you have all of these kinds of considerations, availability of airports, quality of schools, various things. But then there are completely different dynamics that have to be taken into consideration, and this is why we need well-rounded educations. One dynamic that's in play right now is, I believe in the state of Washington, there is some legislation, or it's from Washington legislators, legislation that is being considered for the U.S. Congress, where it would limit the ability of hedge funds, Wall Street hedge funds, to buy single-family homes. Now, starting about 7, 8 years ago, hedge funds, for investment purposes, began buying up lots of homes, and we're talking by the thousands, okay? So investment banks would get money very cheaply from the Federal Reserve, and then these investment banks would turn around and loan the money out to these hedge funds. And so hedge funds might borrow hundreds of millions of dollars at really low interest rates back then, like 2 or 2.5%. And then they would take the money and go out and bid on homes, and they would make cash bids over the asking price. So people who were trying to buy a home of their own without realizing it, we're up against the agents of hedge funds, and the seller is looking at the offers, and here are these cash offers from hedge funds above the asking price, and people are getting priced out of the market, and they're not being able, they might try 10 or 15 times and just keep being beaten by these hedge fund operations that are buying hundreds and hundreds of homes in a community, and thus being able to get control of the rental value in the market and up the rental cost, which makes it harder for regular people. So here's my point. My point is that being able to understand that kind of dynamic in housing, and whether or not there are new laws that are needed to be able to create a fairer playing field for people who need homes, this is really important stuff. I mean, is it a good thing that home prices keep rising and rising? Well, I guess for those people who own multiple homes, it's a good thing. But for people who are trying to get their first home, that's a really difficult thing. And so in our educational context, there are a lot of different kinds of things that need to be learned to understand the full nature of a challenge. And that's why students, we've got to find ways to keep students motivated to be really serious about their education, so that they're not just jumping through hoops and not just merely getting credentials, but they're actually developing quality knowledge that will help them in their voting and their political activities.
Yeah, I think that is great points. Let me see. So, what do you think the future holds on this topic? Do you think that people will have a turnaround and become more educated on these topics? Or do you think that the decline is just going to keep going? Or option C of it's just in our hands and what we make of it?
Wow. How to deal with that one? Briefly. Let me approach that from a little different angle. I'm going to triangulate here and suggest that the move towards AI, artificial intelligence, is creating some uncertainty as to how we will deal with these things in the future, because it looks like AI will be able to do a lot of our thinking for us. So maybe, and what do you think? I want to hear your thoughts on this, Chloe. Maybe we'll get to the place where it's a lot easier, rather than learning certain things, to just type in a few words on the computer and let the computer think for us and tell us what an answer is on a given subject. I mean, it reminds me of that old 1960s movie, The Time Machine, in which they projected themselves in the future, and this is basically what they discovered, an AI environment. They were imagining that, like 60 years ago. So let me turn the question around, Chloe. What do you think AI's impact will be on the level of their knowledge to be able to participate properly in the political process?
AI is scary. I do not like it at all. And as a student, it is really stress to us to not use AI. And I kind of appreciate that. I definitely think that what you said, we should not be typing a few words into it and letting it tell us how to come up with solutions. It is useful. It has its uses, but I don't think it should replace learning, replace reading, only in circumstances where it really needs to be used, should it be used.
But how do you inspire the person who feels like they don't have enough impact on the political process to make it worthwhile to get the learning? So let the other people who have the opportunities get the learning. If that's the attitude, how do you help these people want to get involved?
Yeah, I think that you definitely need to stress to these types of people that their involvement is important, that everyone needs to be involved, and that everyone can make a difference. I think that would be my answer. Is, like I said, I used to think that one vote doesn't matter, that one vote doesn't make a difference, but it definitely does. Every vote is important. Everybody's opinion is important. And that would be my answer, is to stress that to them. There are studies, there are facts out there that can prove the importance of political involvement, and that would be how I would do that, is just kind of really stress what we have talked about today, the importance of it all.
Now, you said that there are teachers in your family, and before you became interested in political science, you were interested in teaching. So, how, Chloe, for young people, school-age kids, can we make political learning exciting and interesting to them? Do you have any thoughts on that?
That is a hard question. Yeah, my grandmother and my aunt are both teachers, and I have other people in my family that are also teachers, but they're the ones I talk to the most. And it is difficult. It's hard. And in some school environments, you're not allowed to openly discuss politics too much. I would say the best way that I would do it is kind of in middle school and high school. I wouldn't go below that, but in middle school and high school for people, that's when I would start bringing in these types of, maybe your assignment that night is to go watch the news and write about what is happening, that type of thing. That would be how I would do that. This kind of, I don't want to say force students to watch the news or be educated, but you definitely would have to give them some incentive.
How about field trips to meet media people, or field trips to meet politicians, or go down to bureaucratic agencies that manage land or natural resources, whatever, and give kids a hands-on opportunity to
Yeah, I'm
learn.
definitely a hands-on person. I'm a very visual person. I need pictures to kind of grasp what I'm trying to learn, so I think that would also be really, really helpful too. Like, field trips, don't ever underestimate that. There's always a lot that can be learned there. Yeah, I know that some teachers are probably listening to our show right now because I'm friends with a few teachers. So if they are, maybe this will give you some ideas of what you could do to kind of make this more interesting for your students. And I'll definitely suggest this to some of my friends that are in the education program, give them some ideas. But so we are nearing the end of our show, and I am going to have a question that I'm going to ask every one of my guests to kind of wrap it up. So basically, in a short answer, like, what would your advice be to the listeners on this topic? What's the number one thing that they should take away from what we've talked about today?
Well, deep philosophical question that you've asked. I think the place to start is to really know oneself. It's easier to help others if one understands one's own motives and goals. So be introspective. Take time to figure out what you're all about and what you want to be in life, and the ways that you see yourself being able to give back to your community and society. And then when you know your own aptitudes and gifts, and you understand the depth of your character to try to do something for others, then be somewhat innovative in trying to find ways to express that passion for the public good. I think that's the motivational side of it, and that's where I'd start, Chloe.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on this episode. Thank you, Dr. Barnett, for coming on. Come back next week at the same time, and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube in case you miss anything. So, yeah, thank you all so much. And until next time, this is Chloe Cooley signing off.